Here you have the electric motor. Over here you have the fuel cell. Here you have the hydrogen tank, which is, by the way, under extreme pressure. And here you have the battery. So let's start driving and see exactly what happens. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's episode of the Thrifty 3. And as you can tell, that is not a Tesla Model 3 behind me because ours is still in the shop. But that car is special. It is only one of 3 cars in America that is powered by, well, one of the most abundant fuel sources in the universe. And it actually does the Tesla one better because if you lease it, basically Hyundai will pay you to drive it. So in this video, let's take the Hyundai Nexo for a drive. Let's explain to you how you could get a car company to pay you to drive their cars. And let's first and foremost look under the hood and find out what makes this car so special. Under the hood of the Hyundai Nexo is something completely special and unique. It's not a diesel engine, it's not an internal combustion of any sort, it's not even a battery, even though this car does have a battery. It's this, a fuel cell. In other words, a fuel stack that takes hydrogen, one of the most plentiful elements in the universe, and converts it into electricity, which is stored in a battery, and then what comes out of the tailpipe is, well, something you could possibly drink. It's water. How clean is that? I mean, that is perhaps one of the most ecologically friendly ways of getting from point A to point B. Okay, never mind the fact that you have to make the hydrogen and that takes energy, but let's leave that aside for a moment and let's just revel in the glory of the fuel cell. We are here in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and we're driving all the way back to our offices in Boulder, Colorado, which is exactly 523 miles from here.
Road trip food.
Road trip food. This thing makes an interesting noise. Let me have you listen to it when it's running all electric. The Nexo's electric motor puts out a meager 161 horsepower, but a very sufficient 292 pound-foot of torque. So you'd think it'd be fast, but the 0 to 60 time is around 8 seconds, which is considerably slower than any Tesla Model 3 variant. So what does that mean in terms of how it drives? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's get behind the wheel and let's burn some hydrogen and spit out some water. Oh yeah. Listen to that hydrogen burble, rattle, hum. What does hydrogen do when it's being used up? Fizz? I have no clue. But we have 345 miles of range, and once again, the problem is right there. Nearby station, no hydrogen stations found within range, and that's because we're in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So yeah, this is not going anywhere except for around here, where me and a whole bunch of other journalists are going to get to drive it. So don't expect a long road trip during this review. We're just going to take it around the Coeur d'Alene hood. And just like the Hyundai Palisades, we have a push-button transmission, which you either hate or love, and I kind of hate. And then we also have different drive modes. So let's see what we have here. We have Eco, we have Normal, we have Eco, and we have Normal. So there you have it. Eco or Normal, no Sport. Kind of makes sense. The interior design of the Nexo is kind of like the exterior, and once again I'm going to use 2 words that don't really belong together but often are found together, and that is frumpy and chic. Let me explain. I'm wearing what I think is a pretty chic Garmin Phoenix sport watch. That is chic. Now look at me. That is frumpy. Same thing with this design. It somehow manages to be both chic and a little old-fashioned and not quite stylish at the same time. I don't know how you accomplish it, but I'm sure you'll let me know in the comments below. So you may be wondering just what powers this car and how does the energy flow, and there's a helpful diagram that's buried. Oops, I just went to the music. That's not going to be helpful. Let me go over here and let me show you the energy flow of this vehicle. And this diagram is actually really good. So here you have the electric motor. Over here you have the fuel cell. Here you have the hydrogen tank, which is, by the way, under extreme pressure. And here you have the battery. So let's start driving and see exactly what happens to the energy flow. So right now, it's a little confusing, but hydrogen is coming out of the hydrogen tank going into the fuel cell, where H2 plus O2 are combining to create H2O, which is water, which is coming out the tailpipe, which is powering the electric motor. Now remember, I said that this also has a battery that can be used to store energy, and when I get on the main road, I'm going to give it a little bit of the beans. Oh, there it happened for a second, and then all of a sudden the energy will also come from the battery to give you a little bit brisker acceleration. And then when I let off the beans, the energy will flow back into the battery like it's doing right now, regenerating power so that it stores it in the battery. So here we go, we're on the main road. We're gonna go a little bit of the beans and you'll see power start flowing from the battery to the motor. Ooh, there it goes. And then let me let off, and once again now it's regenerating power back into the battery. So it's kind of a hybrid. Of course, hydrogen gas does not have the same caloric value as gasoline, so that means that you have to basically compress the beans out of it to be able to get enough in the tank to get, well, in this case, 350 to 380 miles of range. What does that look like? Well, it looks very similar to gasoline. Instead of having liquid, you have hydrogen, which is in the form of gas that is put into the car through a nozzle that looks very much like, well, like a hydrogen gas nozzle. You remember when the Model S first came out, it had those really cool door handles that popped out, and people were like, wow, door handles that pop out and are flushly mounted so it's aerodynamically clean? Well, you figured rightly if you thought that that was going to get stolen by other car makers, because the Nexo has those very same door handles. Let me show you. Now the Nexo does sort of compete with the Model 3. It starts at about $55,000 and goes up to about $65,000, but you really don't want to buy this car, you want to lease it, and I'll tell you why in a second. But it does compete with directly is, of course, the Toyota Mirai, which is also a fuel cell car, and the Honda Clarity. But it does both of those and the Model 3 one better with a very clever and very common feature, and that is this. All of those cars are traditional sedans, whereas the Nexo is, let me show you, it's a crossover. Yep, pretty common, but this is what most buyers want today. So that means, of course, I've got headroom, I've got space behind me for my stuff, and I've got a car that is more practical than any of the other three that I just mentioned. All right, so here's the biggest issue with the Nexo in my mind. I do love the fact that it runs on hydrogen. I think that's really cool. I love the fact that nothing but water comes out the tailpipe. I love the fact that it's kind of the next level up beyond just an electric car. But the secret sauce in Tesla, for me, always has been that when you're behind the wheel of any of the Teslas, including the Model 3, you feel like you're driving the car of the future. And by that I mean that Tesla took the typical car mold and smashed it into bits and completely rebuilt it. So the driving experience is completely unique. The braking experience is completely unique. The technology is completely unique. In fact, everything about it, from the way that you open it up just by walking up and having your phone in your pocket, to the way that it doesn't even have a push button start, completely transforms the way that you drive a car. It feels like the car of the future. Unfortunately, this Nexo does not feel like the car of the future. The power plant feels like it's the future, but the rest of the car feels like, well, like I said, like a smaller version of a CR-V. I bet that if I were to drive this down Hollywood Boulevard, nobody would look twice. There would be no, like, ooh, look, there's the hydrogen-powered car. And the same could be said for the Clarity and, oh my gosh, the Mirai. All three of them just don't work because they're built by legacy car companies, traditional car companies that want to keep the car the same as it's always been and just change what's under the hood. Having said that, if I lived in California, especially in LA or San Francisco, there is no doubt in my mind that I would get one of these bad boys, because not only is it extremely environmentally friendly, and once again, you can, in the comments, argue how much energy is being used to actually produce the hydrogen that powers this car versus how much electricity is being generated and how it's being generated, you know, all that stuff. But just as an early adopter for new technology, I love the fact that I've got something unique and something magical under the hood. And what makes this unique in terms of at least hydrogen cars is that it has one of the greatest ranges out there. It'll do anywhere from 350 to almost 380 miles on a tank full, and that's very good. The downside, of course, is that today hydrogen costs about 4 times as much in terms of its energy potential as gasoline, so it's very expensive to fill up. But Hyundai has thought of that. Now, if you recall, I said you don't want to buy this car, and that's because you can lease it. And when you lease it, something very special happens. It leases for about $400 to $500 a month, but as part of the lease, Hyundai will give you $13,000 worth of hydrogen, basically to drive the car. So in other words, they will pay you, that's right, they will pay you to drive this car. And that, in my book, is a no-brainer. And if I lived in California, there's no doubt that I would be leasing one of these. I actually thought about leasing one and bringing it to Colorado, and the biggest problem with that is that there's only one hydrogen station in Colorado, and that is in Boulder at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, but it is not available for us to use. In other words, it's not publicly available. And of course, the other drawback is that in all of California, there are about, what, 30 public hydrogen stations right now. So if you live in LA, maybe in San Francisco, this is a viable vehicle for you. If you live anywhere else in the country, not so much. And in case you're wondering, there is a screen here that does measure just how much H2 fuel economy you are getting. And in today's world, it's getting very confusing. Not only do you have MPG, but you have MPGE, which is the equivalent, and now you have H2 fuel economy. But the big number here is right there, 37.9 MPGE, or the equivalent of 37.9 miles per gallon electric. And of course, since this is the greenest of green vehicles, you do have eco contribution. So once again, you've got the number of purified air and CO2 reduction, I believe that's kilograms. And so the car kindly tells you that by driving it, you are helping to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is being dumped into the atmosphere, and in my case, 1.2 kilograms. Once again, let me know what that means in the comments below, because this is above my pay grade. Now, the cool thing about a Tesla, whether you love it or whether you hate it, the styling is certainly unique. There's no front grille because, of course, there's no internal combustion engine. I would consider the styling of the Nexo, let's call it frumpy chic. In other words, I kind of like this line that runs horizontally across the entire grille, but when you look at the silhouette of the car and you see it kind of from, let's say, 10 feet away, it's a little bit frumpy. And I know they've kind of gone out of their way to try to make it look like it's futuristic, but underneath it, it's still pretty much just a standard old crossover like the Honda CR-V, except that this one has a little bit of magic going on under the hood. Both Japanese manufacturers and Korean manufacturers have taken to hydrogen cars in a big way. So while there's only, let's say, 3 dozen hydrogen stations in California right now and pretty much 0 in the rest of the country, Japan and Korea have both committed to having hydrogen-powered cars in the future and having it be one of the major sources of power for their cars. And you may be asking yourself, why is that? And that's because both of those countries don't have vast resources of natural energy. In other words, Japan doesn't have huge stores of dead dinosaurs, yes, gasoline, under their shores. Neither does Korea. And so when you power a car with a material that is readily available anywhere, that you can basically manufacture, then that makes a lot of sense to a place like Japan or Korea. So is it a fun car to drive and own? Well, it depends what kind of a person you are. It's kind of like the Rubik's Cube. If you love the technical challenge of doing the Rubik's Cube, if you can spend hours trying to figure out how to make one side one color, if you can spend hours getting the most fuel economy out of the least amount of hydrogen, then you'll enjoy this car. On the other hand, if you're like me and you like the sound, the raw power of, well, let me show you. Can you guess what I'm standing between? I said I'd show you. To my right is a Mustang and to my left is a Challenger. And if you love the raw power, the in-your-face styling, and of course the immediacy of an internal combustion engine, then I don't think the Nexo is for you. Of course, hydrogen cars in this country aren't exactly on fire, thank God, like electric cars are, so maybe the Tesla Model 3 Performance is the perfect hybrid between an environmentally friendly car and something like these two traditional muscle cars. As always, this is Roman reporting for the Fastlane Car. Be sure to come back next week when hopefully our Model 3 will finally be fixed and we can do a real-world range test on it for more Thrifty 3 reviews. See you guys next time. Ciao. I would love to get behind the wheel of either of these. And you might be thinking to yourself, can you drink the water that comes out of a fuel cell? And the answer is you probably can, but you probably wouldn't want to, because water is more than just H2O. There's also other things in it that are good for you that this water doesn't have. So it's basically like drinking distilled water. So if you really are thirsty, yeah, you could drink it, but don't make a habit of it.